Now we'll see the explanation for the backtracking code. As you see in the backtracking code, the subset, the DFS function has one global variable subset. The subset will get appended before when this function starts, and after we come out of the recursive call, that is DFS of I plus 1, we basically remove the last element from the subset to ensure the state remains correctly according to the concept of backtracking. So that is why we do subset.pop here. And after doing subset.pop, we ensure that the state of the subset is reverted back to its original state, and we call another new DFS of I plus 1 recursive call. And this will ensure that new subset is printed in the output by ensuring that the input parameter passed is equal to the length of the array. That is how this program is done. As we see here, we'll use this entire set, and we'll generate the subsets for this given set using backtracking. So before going to solve this problem, please keep these symbols in mind. So when I use a dot, it means I'm going to another recursive function, and when I use dotted lines, that means I'm performing an operation inside the given function. So I will start with nothing, and then what the code says is the subset will be appending num of I plus 1, num of I. So we'll be appending I, and then we are going to pass I plus 1 as the parameter to the next function. So I is currently 0 and I will be 1. So this 1 will be passed off as a parameter to the next function. So the next function has this as the input, and then we are going to add 1 comma 2 to the subset, and then we'll be incrementing this input parameter by 1, which is 2, and then we are going to the next function. That is what this dot represents. So as we go over here, we have 1 comma 2, similarly 1 comma 2, followed by, since there is 2 here, we'll be adding this index, that is the second index, 0 1 2, 1 comma 2 comma 3, and the next parameter that is going to be passed to the function will be 3. So the next function has 1 comma 2 comma 3 as the input, and then 1 comma 2 comma. The next function will be adding 4 in the subset, and then we are passing 4 as the parameter and going to the next recursive function. So after going to 4, what's happening here is the if condition is satisfied, so we will be printing this subset. So 1 comma 2 comma 3 comma 4 will be printed. So print 1 comma 2 comma 3 comma 4, and we revert back to the previous function. So what happens to the previous function is we are at the function part, that is we are at the recursive line part, and then we go to the next part where 4 is popped off. So the current subset will be 1 comma 2 comma 3, and then we'll be passing 1 comma 2 comma 3 and 4 as the parameter. So, and since this is 4, the condition, if condition in the function is satisfied, so 1 comma 2 comma 3 is also printed. So what's basically happening here is this is 1 comma 2 comma 3 comma 4, and when you go back to the function, the current subset has 1 2 3 4, and 4 is popped off, and after 4 is being popped off, we are basically using the same subset and then passing 4 as the parameter to the function, and then 1 comma 2 comma 3 will be in the existing subset. Since the input parameter passed is equal to the length of the list, we are printing this subset, and we again now revert back to the previous function. So at this function we have 1 2 3 at this part, so the subset will be the end part, that is 3 will be popped off. So what is left is currently 1 comma 2, and we are now passing 1 comma 2 comma 3 as the input to the next function. So at the next function, so 1 comma 2 comma 3, at 1 comma 2 comma 3 we will be adding 1 2 and this index, that is the fourth index, the third index, 0 1 2 3. So we will be adding 4, and the input parameter that is passed to the next function will be 4, and now we are calling the next function. So the next function has input as 1 comma 2 comma 4. So at 4, what's happening here is we have 1 comma 2 comma 4, and the input parameter that is passed to the function is 4. Since this 4 is equal to the number of input functions at the length of the list, we will be printing this value also. So after going back to 4, after printing this, we go back to this function and we remove 4 from this point, from the subset. After removing 4 from the subset, that is, we go back to this function and we remove 4 from the subset, and what is left is 1, 2, and now we'll be passing 1, 2 followed by 4. So when 1, 2 followed by 4 is passed and we call the next function, this 4 is equal to the length of the list. So 1, 2 is also printed. So when 1, 2 is printed, we again go back to the previous function and we now go back to this function. So after going back to this function, we are at this point where we revert back. And when we are going back here, we are now going back here. So we are now at this point where where the state of the subset is 1, 2. Now 2 is popped off and we revert back to this state, which is 1. So after the state of the subset is 1, we now go to the next function with the point as 1, 2. So at 1, 2, what's going to happen is we have a new parameter, and since this input parameter is 2, we'll be including this point, that is 3. So 1, 3 followed by then input parameter to the next function will also be 3. So we will be calling the next function 1, 3 followed by 3. Now we will be adding 1, 3, 4, and the next parameter will be 4. So since this 4 is equal to the, when we call the next function, 4 is equal to the length of the list, so this will be printed. So 1, 3, 4 is printed, and we revert back to the previous function and we remove 4 from the subset, and what is left is 3, 1, 3, and then before calling the next function, the input parameter will be 1, 3, 4. Since the input parameter will be 4, we will also be printing 1, 3. And since these two cases are over, we'll revert back. We go back here. While going back, the current state of the subset is 1, 3, and this 1, 3 will be where the 1 will be popped off right here. And after popping this 1 off, what's going to happen is this 1 will be passed off as 1, 3, and after passing 1, 3, this 3 is the input parameter. After passing 1, 3 as the input parameter, we'll be going to the next function, that is 1, 3, and we'll be adding 1, 4 followed by 4, and this will be printing, since this input parameter is 4, we'll be printing 1, 4 in the output. And after printing 1, 4 in the output, we'll be going back to the function where we remove 4 and what's left is 1, and we'll be using 1, 4, and we'll now print, and this is going to be 1. So we have now printed 1, 1, 4, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 3, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we now basically printed all subsets which contain the value 1. So now we revert back. While we are reverting back, we go to this part, and we go to this part where the function is completely over and the current subset is also 1, and we again go back to the main function where the current subset is also 1. So when this is 1 here, we now see what's going to happen. So what's going to happen is basically we are going to pass an empty set with the index 1. So what we are passing here is an empty set followed by the index 1, because we have popped off 1 from the current subset. So we are now having this value, and then while the current function has 1 value, so we'll be including 2 followed by the current parameter to the next function will be 2, and we go to the next function. And now what's going to happen is the next function has 2, 2 as the input, and we'll now be appending 2, 3, and follow the input parameter to the next function will be 3, and we'll call the next function, and the next function has 2, 3 as the input from the previous function. We are now going to have 2, 3, 4, and 4 is appended to this current subset that is present in this part of the function, and 4 will be passed as the parameter to the next input function. So we are now going to call the next function. At the next function, the input parameter is 4. So 2, 3, 4 is printed. So this is printed. Similarly, we revert back. When we revert back, we see that the function part is over and we pop the last element from 4. So what is left here is 2, 3. So 2, 3 followed by the input parameter is 4. So we are now going to pass 2, 3 followed by 4. Since this 4 is equal to the number of elements in the array, 2, 3 is also printed. So after 2, 3 is printed, we go back and at 2, 3, at this point we go from this point and these functions to this part where 3 is present. Now 3 is popped and 2 is present in the array. So what is going to be passed is 2 followed by 3, and now 2 followed by 3 means we are going to add 2, 4 to the array followed by 4, and now this 4 is equal to the number of elements in the input array. This input parameter 4 is equal to the number of parameters in the input array. So 2, 4 will also be printed. Now we revert back and we are now at this point before this dot. Now the 4 here will be removed, that is subset.pop will happen, and what is left is only this state, that is 2. That is, we go back to the previous state and at 2 the input parameter will also keep increasing. So that is, input parameter is increased as 4 and the value of subset is 2. So we are now printing 2. So now we revert back from this part, we go back here and we go reach this point where we have 2 inside the subset followed by 2. Now what is going to happen is this 2 will be removed. So if you see here, we have 2, 2, 4, 2, 3 and 2, 3, 4. So all of these subsets contain the value 2 in it. Earlier, all of these subsets contain the value 1 in them. That is starting from 1, 4 to 1, 2, 3, 4. Now what is going to happen is we remove 2 from the subset. That is, we have gone back in the recursion tree and now we have backtracked back to the previous state. That is, by removing 2 using subset.pop, we are at this point. Now we are passing the same we are having the same subset and passing the input parameter as 2. Now what's going to happen is, with input parameter as 2, we are going to include the second element in the array, that is 3. So 3 will be included and the next input parameter will be 3, and this is going to be passed to the next recursive function. Now we are having 3, 4. Now 3, 4 followed by 4, this is going to be printed. 3, 4 followed by 4 means the input parameter is 4 and 3, 4 is the final output. So we are going to print this value. And now when we revert back, we are at this point, that is 4. This 4 will be removed. Now we are at the same subset 3. This subset will be passed by incrementing the input value. Similarly, this will also be printed in the next function. That is, after calling the dot, that is this function, we have the subset as 3. So 3 will also be printed. So we now revert back. Now this reverts back, and after reverting back, let's see what the subset of 3 is. That is 3, 3, 3, 4, and then that's it. So we now revert back. We go back to this point, that is 3. Now we remove 3 from the subset, and what we are left with is basically an empty subset where we pass the value, where we don't pass any value, and the input parameter to this will be 3. Now we call the next function, and while calling the next function, we see that we could add another element to the subset, and we increment the input parameter by 4 and call the next function. And since the input parameter satisfies this condition, this 4 is also printed. So after this 4 is printed, we revert back, and after printing 4, we revert back to the previous function. At this function, we have the subset as 4, and when the subset is 4, the subset pops the remaining value 4 from the list, and then what is left is one empty subset. So this subset will be passed with the input parameter as 4, and then we are going to print this open subset using in the next function, because the input parameter has satisfied the if conditions in the next if statement. So as you see now, this empty parameter has been printed, empty list has been printed. Now we could easily revert back to the previous functions. We could revert back here, we revert back here, we revert back here, and we revert back to this point, and we revert back to the original point, and when we are at the original point, the subset will be empty. So this is how all the subsets in the list are printed. Thank you.